Bronwyn Bishop, are you there, ma'am?
I am indeed, Jeremy, and good morning to you, Ian.
Good morning, Bronwyn, and how are you up the Insular Peninsula?
Oh, still waiting for you to come to lunch.
There you go. Yes, that's only been an offer for about 3 years, I think. It's not too bad.
Not too bad, no.
Well, Bronwyn, you looked wonderfully, wonderfully well. In fact, you looked younger than I remember you, and I've known you and talked to you for, must be 25 or 30 years.
Indeed it is. But, Jeremy, it was a lovely occasion, wasn't it, on Sunday?
No, it was. It was a very memorable occasion. How did you get involved with the Grundys? What was that story? Well,
I guess we were very close during the referendum on the Republic. And I remember a really beautiful dinner on the Boa de Sia, where there were only about 10 of us for dinner. And after the result had been successful, of course.
That was his beautiful boat, wasn't it?
That was indeed, yes, an amazing craft.
Yeah. He never struck me as being a particularly political man. Interesting that he got involved in that referendum.
Well, I think Joy was the driving force there. She was really quite involved in the whole idea of it.
Yes. Yeah, well, I don't think we need any more referenda, but at $500 billion a pop.
But of course, the poor old Albo, he thought, this will be a piece of cake, I'll push that through, and then I'll repeat the performance telling everybody nothing, and we'll have a republic, and that'll be my mark. And I'm sure that's all that's ever been in that empty head of his.
Well,
there is no understanding about the economy or what Australia's role has to be, or how to deal with the China problem, or indeed even how to deal with our neighbours in the Pacific. Yeah. I mean, we had a very difficult position there right before the election, when Maurice Payne was the foreign minister and simply refused to go to the Solomon Islands, and that was a difficulty. And of course, they went in and exploited it. But there's a whole range of policy initiatives that are needed for our neighbours, and for them it's sloganeering, it's trying to score points, and the country's in a mess as a result.
Yeah, I was listening to Parliament yesterday, and I really couldn't think of... It was just so embarrassingly bad. Just rabble, mostly sort of centring the bit I heard anyway around the Greens. Do you listen to Parliament? Do you keep across what it's doing today, as opposed to... Yeah? What do you think of the current standard of debate and argument?
Well, I think the Senate is just appalling, and having been a senator, in fact, I'm the only person who's been a senator, a member, a minister, and Speaker of the House.
We were talking about that earlier. Yes. How did you do that?
Well, it wasn't easy.
Well, pure ambition.
And, I must say, making the transition from the Senate to the House is quite difficult, and a whole bunch of people followed me there and didn't succeed. Everyone from Fred Cheney to Gareth Evans. So.
But you were almost Prime Minister. I remember in the studio years ago when you came in and you signed the visitor's book, which I've got right over there. And I said to you, look, it looks like you're going to be the Prime Minister any day. Why don't we be cheeky, just for the book, I mean, sign it, Bronwyn Bishop, Prime Minister. And you had the pen over the page, and I thought you were going to do it, and then you didn't.
And Bronwyn, Les Elekes here in the studio with Jeremy and Professor Plimer. I guess the key to your success is, and I've seen you speak a number of times in person. I'm a Liberal Party card holder. But the key to your success is the longevity of your career. You're an octogenarian, I think 83. So part of success is
no. I'm not 83.
Couldn't
82 then. 82. I don't want to age you prematurely.
Well, she looks 25. I can tell you that.
I'm 10 years shy of that age, but in my recollection, looking at politics over the years in Australia, I reckon we've got the worst bunch of leadership this country's ever seen, and the worst plans for our future. It's almost like the Greens and Albanese want to destroy our future. What's your view on that?
You've got it really on the right track, because the hard socialist aim, and that's the Greens and that's Albo, he's always been on the far left, is to have a socialist world where it is borderless and nationless. They hate the nation state. They hate what we stand for. And I was reading through some old papers of committees I've served on, even before I went into Parliament, when I had a political committee, an arts committee, and we put out a statement that started by saying our culture is a matter of defence. If you have no culture, you've nothing to defend. And what is happening with the Greens is they want to destroy everything that makes up that culture. Now, when we have invited people to come to this country from other parts of the world, it's to add to the culture, not to destroy it, because there is a dominant Australian culture, which continues to be added to. But those who want to destroy it and replace it with something else are traitors to our nation.
Yeah, it's very high-handed to come in and start rearranging other people's furniture, or in fact even being encouraged to do so.
Yes, but I'm talking about the Greens. They're almost a fifth column. They don't love our country.
They're not
they
green.
Hate our country.
If they were looking after things like the garden and planting things and just generally producing more carbon dioxide, plant food, Professor?
Well, they're green on the outside and red inside. They're watermelons.
Yeah, well, God help us.
I mean, it's just appalling what they're suggesting, and I don't know why the young people haven't woken up to this. They get their standard 12% vote. Yeah. I think people are waking up to Albo, and as you heard before on the show, I was in Broken Hill yesterday. Now, Broken Hill used to be a Labor town. It isn't now. In the local elections, previously Labor would just walk it in. Not now. It's independents. Previously, Labor would walk in the state seat. Not now. It's shooters and fishers. And in the last state election, 8 out of the 8 booths went to the National Party. So the working people are waking up. It's the middle-class suburbia. It's the people who want to have green twinges. Yeah. And it's only possible because of what our forefathers have done to build this country. And it's only possible to destroy the country the way the Greens are doing it, with wealth.
Yeah, but
we're a wealthy country, and what they're doing is destroying it, and quite deliberately. This is not an accident. This is not due to stupidity.
Do you think, Bronwyn, that they will hold the balance of power if we've got a hung parliament next time?
No, I can't believe that the Australian people would let that happen. I do think that Dutton has the possibility of winning the election. In fact, it's getting closer to being not possible, but predictable.
Shouldn't he be further ahead, though? I mean, 50-50 is a bit much. There's a lot of ammunition that the Libs could be using if they wanted to.
Yes, well, that's looking at a national across-the-board vote. It's when you start to look seat by seat, that's where you've got to look at it. Yeah. And when you start doing that, you can see the pathway for Dutton to win.
Yes, you've got the seats in Western Australia. You've got here in South Australia the seat of Boothby, which Nicole Flick will win back. She's working very, very hard against a lazy local Labor member. So it's just picking them off one by one. You don't try to conquer the whole country. It's just
and I think as far as policy is concerned, as soon as the Liberals really home in and zoom in on the real issues of cost of living, and to remind people all the promises that Albo and the party made, and they really start checking their bills, they'll recognise and realise that Albanese, and I think the polls are showing this, that people just haven't trusted him for delivering what he said he's going to do. And I think once that's reminded to the people in earnest in campaigning, I think the cards will start to fall rather rapidly.
Yeah. Well, if you go back over the last several elections, whenever the question of climate change and so on was a major issue, and we held the line about saying that we will keep prices down, that we have got a better plan, that we will not succumb to the international pressure, we won. But the minute that Morrison said he was going off to Glasgow and committing to net zero by 2050, we lost. Now the question is being dealt with differently. Now that we've got that madman Bowen trying to destroy the country with these power lines across it, you've got a sensible policy coming up from Dutton with nuclear being added to the mix, and the fact that we can use the existing grid and don't have to destroy productive agricultural land, and that we can then deliver reliable and much cheaper power by planning for the future and by having a mix of sources for that energy to enable the lights to be kept on. So again, I think it was interesting that we actually had to see what madness would occur to our country once Labor got in power, that people will see that their plans for keeping energy to provide for the country are just a mess. And as for the Treasurer, I call him the snake charmer because it's all an illusion.
Well, in defence of Mr. Bowen,
this'll be good.
He's not as bad as Ed Miliband from the UK, and I think Mr. Bowen should stay in that portfolio. He's the best thing the Liberal Party has. Keep him there. He is probably the worst federal minister we've had for decades, certainly since the Whitlam government. And the climate policy has been a very clever policy to use because it's allegedly underpinned by science. No one understands science. We've had 50 years of dumbing down our education system. So you can tell people that plant food, carbon dioxide, is a pollutant, and people actually believe it. And the rubber's now hit the road. The electricity prices have gone up, and those who are running small businesses are feeling it. I spend a lot of my time talking to rural communities. On Monday night, I spoke in Robe in the southeast of South Australia. 2 weeks before that, I spoke in Oberon in New South Wales. And these farmers are actually white hot with anger. What's happening to their prime land, how they're being absolutely and totally bulldozed by energy companies who are foreign companies using Chinese equipment to absolutely destroy farmland. And the votes on the edge of rural seats, the votes on the edge of suburbia, I think the people have got their baseball bats and they're just waiting. There is a huge amount of anger out there. I've never seen it like this before.
But you wouldn't pick it up, Bronwyn, in the media, would you? There's a very strange sort of support that this government is getting.
Well, you certainly can be grateful. We've got terrific people like on Sky, where I'm delighted to be taking part in programs.
And I do enjoy you pursuing the lefties, especially Nicholas Rees, who I clashed with occasionally. But it's really wonderful. And a lot of people listening to this program would actually get Sky free to air.
Yep.
Yes.
Who's the smartest politician you've run across in your marvellous career, Bronwyn? Apart from you.
If I'm going to be honest, I had the great honour of knowing Margaret Thatcher, and also having had lunch at the White House with Ronald Reagan.
Oh, wonderful.
Now those two people were amazing. And I can recall being at a conference in Tokyo hosted by the Japanese Prime Minister that Margaret Thatcher was at, and a lot of other heads of centre-right governing parties were, and having to present a paper. And ironically, it was a paper on the politics of the Pacific Island states. And it was amazing to have her actually listening to a paper I was giving and actually interact with me afterwards. So they're huge international figures. But honestly,
what do you think made them exceptional?
Commitment. Absolute commitment and unswathing commitment. I remember Margaret Thatcher coming to our party room when we were still in opposition, and John Howard asked her to come and speak to us. And she stood up there, and the first thing she said, "I take it you want to win." And there was this kind of polite silence sort of thing. And then she just raised her voice and said, I take it you wish to win. Then she got a response. But she was innovative. She believed in the policies of free enterprise. She believed in individualism. She dragged a country that was on a 3-day working week and was broke back into prosperity.
Yeah. Bronwyn, how would you rate contemporary leaders, particularly in Europe, like Geert Wilders and Viktor Orban of Hungary? I mean, they haven't been around a long time, but they have very, very positively wanting to draw the community and their countries back into the centre of politics rather than being extreme left or right.
Yes, I haven't met either of them, but I have met the president of Hungary, a woman who was a minister in the Orban government. She's a mother of 4 children, and I've heard her speak and talk about the need to increase the birth rate in Hungary, which had dropped dramatically, as indeed is ours. But they were very much worse. I think they were down close to 1.2 or something like that. So she talked about introducing policies that gave advantages to people who committed to having children and to marriage and so on, and they have actually brought that birth rate up. So there are many issues where Hungary is quite an interesting place to look at, as is the movement in Europe generally, where I think people were over what happened in Germany, where they were just let down so badly with bringing in those 1 million people from across the Mediterranean, and what that has done to Europe is just dreadful.
Where did your political nous come from? Yours wasn't a political family. Your father was an engineer, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He thinks engineers are the most sensible people on earth.
And geologists.
Yes.
Yes, he was. And my mother was an opera singer. But I came to it through school, through studying history, contemporary European history in particular. And it taught me that individuals can make a difference, but it can be for good or for evil. And so we had Hitler, who was a strong, powerful leader for evil, and Churchill, who was a strong, powerful leader for good. Yeah. And I decided I wanted to have a say in what happened to my country.
And both of those were elected, of course. I mean, you can understand being elected if you're good, but it's hard to imagine being elected if you're evil.
Well, that's what we have to watch out for, isn't it?
Yes, it's the.
I mean, we have people who are being elected to positions right across the world who do not have the real interests of their nation at heart.
And I think in Australia, Bronwyn, you wouldn't necessarily say that immigration is evil. But when Albanese made a prediction or a policy how many people he's going to let into the country, now we've exceeded that by far. This year we'll exceed that by 100,000 people. But we're talking about over 1 million people who've come into the country, and 80% of Australia's population increase is immigration. And now we've chalked over 27 million, but the evil in all that is the cost of housing, the lack of housing, the lack of services, the congested roads, everything is going to crap, to put it bluntly, in this country. And everything, all our services seem to have major flaws and being broken. Our health system, particularly here in South Australia, which is no different to other states, you can't get into the ED, you can't get services, the waiting lists are getting longer and longer. We're just deteriorating rapidly, and that isn't evil. That isn't evil.
Well, since COVID...
I would never call immigration evil, because people wanting and seeking better lives I can understand. And if you come to Australia, as many people say, you won the lottery. Yeah. But what is wrong with the policy is that, firstly, the people that Albanese appointed to the portfolios of immigration and of, other areas that impinge on that, were very poor because of the background, particularly of the original Minister for Immigration. but it's total lack of being able to understand where the responsibilities lies. Whenever I hear the Labor government saying, "Oh, we're going to build houses," no, they're not. There's no constitutional power for them to build a single house. No. All they can ever do is give us a grant under Section 96 of the Constitution to the state government to say, "Please, this is our policy, which you will now implement."
Yeah.
So, for them to say we are going to do this is just a nonsense.
She knows her stuff.
Yes. Just a local statistic. I read it, I think, in today's Australian. Since COVID, we've had more than the population of South Australia emigrate to Australia. Now,
yes.
I don't have a problem with immigration. We have had some wonderful people come to this country, but you need the infrastructure to cope.
That's right.
And the second thing is you must not have a decline in the standard of living of the average punter.
Or the standard of education. You can't go around giving people a degree when they can't speak English, and that, I understand, has been happening.
Well, I got into all sorts of trouble at various universities for failing people, and I got a reputation of hating Chinese. I didn't. If you are going to have a degree from this institution, you need to be able to speak the Queen's English.
Yes.
And especially for some of the people I was training who were mining engineers who had to sign off on safety documents, and they were in charge of someone else's life. They had to be able to speak the language.
Perfectly fair. Yeah,
yes.
Perfectly fair. When you were...
Well, I have to say, I have my origins in South Australia. My great-grandfather came in 1849.
Oh, wow.
To South Australia, and he was an interesting man. His name was Congreve, Henry William Congreve, and he was, to best describe it, an apprentice doctor in London, and he came to Australia, and he eventually ended up as the editor of the Bunyip.
Oh, yes.
That very famous newspaper, and it was a founder of the Gawler Show. And his sister came out too, and she was Matilda Evans, who was the first woman to be published in Australia as an author. And her books were still being sold as late as the 1920s. And she was featured in the sesquicentenary of South Australia.
Yes.
And a book written about her. So I've got good links into you. And my mother was born there.
Yeah. Hence,
and my aunt taught there. So, yes.
And your mother being an opera singer, hence the connection with the Opera Foundation today, I guess.
Yes, indeed. Yes, very much so.
And Bronwyn, you're no orphan when it comes to controversy, helicopters and transport, etc. And I don't bring up that to be unkind, but what's your take on this controversy with Dan Andrews and his wife in this motorcar accident in Victoria?
Well, first I'd like to say with regard to helicopters, I think it was Wayne Swan who set the precedent in taking aircraft to political events, so it was just following precedent really, but nevertheless it was really about Malcolm Turnbull challenging Tony Abbott. Yeah. But that's a different question. But what's happening down in Victoria, there's a big worry about what is happening in Victoria generally with regard to many issues, going back to how the question of the Galbally, Miss Galbally, wasn't it, who was sort of serving the criminals and leaking to the police. And the prosecution of George Pell, there's something not right. Something not right.
Apart from the fact they can't balance the books, and they'll be in serious trouble for generations to come, I would think. Bronwyn, when you were Speaker, how tough is it to be Speaker? I mean, you'd have to be pretty tough, wouldn't you?
Oh, yes. And furthermore, you have to know the standing orders.
Yes.
And I happen to know them very well.
I gathered.
I always found it very entertaining. I used to watch you on television as Speaker.
Thank you.
Had this marvellous art of putting people in their place. Unfortunately, the box wasn't padlocked and they got out of it every now and then.
Can you remember some?
Well, there were some people who used to get thrown out on a regular basis on a Thursday by really arcing up, because if they did that, they could get the early plane home.
Yeah. Was there anyone in particular that you liked crossing swords with?
Well, I quite enjoyed crossing swords with Paul Keating in the early 90s when he was still there. I do remember he gave a name to all the members of the Shadow Ministry and called them all firecrackers, and he called me a Catherine wheel and said I spun round and round and round.
Well, your second name is Catherine. Oh, no, Kathleen. Kathleen, yes. Kathleen Wheel.
I was then asked about his comments about me in particular. I was in Queensland at the time, and I said, well, perhaps I can return the favour. And I described Mr. Keating as a firework, and I said, he really reminds me of a sparkler. It's all fizz, and then all that's left is a thin black stick.
That wouldn't have gone down very well. You remember the fun that Sir James Killen and Fred Daly used to have? They opposite sides of the aisle, yet they had great respect for each other, and they had a sense of humour that you could have made a wonderful TV show around those guys.
They did. It's called Yes Minister.
I didn't think of that.
They both left the Parliament before I got there, but Jim I did know. In any event, I knew him reasonably well, and he really was a master wit. He really was.
Yeah. What sort of a Prime Minister would Bronwyn have made, Professor?
Oh, superb. Absolutely superb. We would have been a leading nation in the South Pacific rather than withering on the vine. We are now a country where we have lost our sovereignty, a country where bankruptcy is a word that is common if you're running a small business, a country where if you're in big business, you're looking elsewhere. You certainly wouldn't invest in mining in Australia at present. You'd go somewhere else.
Well, they're tying us up in red tape everywhere you look.
Well, I've raised this figure before. We needed for our Roy Hill mine in Western Australia, in the Pilbara, so that's an iron ore mining area, in an iron ore mining state of Western Australia, in an iron ore mining country of Australia, we needed to build that mine, 4,950 approvals. Now, that is just madness, absolute madness. The costs are horrendous. It means unless you're big, you can't possibly do it. And you have to have a special team dealing with this. And there are tens of metres of documents, hundreds of millions of costs, and a lot of it was repetition.
Red tape.
And look, one of the matrices of, or part of the matrix of our productivity and prosperity is the ABS figures of business failures. And we've got record high business failures, which means we're not doing, well, the government's not pulling the right levers, as Ian says, to attract business and to keep business.
It's not too late, Bronwyn. Would you like to have another go?
Conrad, I don't know.
Come back to us.
Well, Chancellor at 92, so there's plenty
I think
of time.
I think what I'd like to see is to see Peter Dutton get elected. But I must say, we are very fortunate to have somebody like Gina Reinhardt leading that company, Ian, because she is a dynamo internationally. I mean, what she has been able to achieve and her honesty in putting her points of view, supporting Olympic people and paying more tax almost, I think, than anybody else. I think I heard a statistic said she pays enough tax to pay every pension in Tasmania.
No, that's correct. And I sit on 10 of her boards. I work very closely with her. And there's a lot that people don't know about her. For example, I was in Thailand earlier in the year. She had flown all of the families of the Olympians to Thailand to give them a 2-week holiday, saying, you got out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning to take your kids training. Thank you for that. She has charities in Cambodia where she buys young girls being sold into prostitution, puts them through an orphanage, a school, and some of them through universities. Every now and then some of these girls come and talk at all of the operations. These girls are multilingual, and they just give their life story. And it's just absolutely incredible. Now, she doesn't go around boasting about what she does. No. She just does it. She's the greatest woman this country has ever produced. She could very easily live in Singapore and pay a fraction of the tax she pays, and she wouldn't get pilloried as she does in this country. So I think she's absolutely marvellous. She's fabulous to work with and one of the best brains I've ever met.
Mm. Well, I agree with you, Ian, and I'm very proud to know her and to have done so for many years, and I just think we are very fortunate to have someone like her who is be able to lead in so many fields, even though it's so quietly. But, one of the things that really worries me is that what we're losing are jobs that have skills. Our manufacturing sector has shrunk enormously, and my personal view was that the coalition government was wrong to force the car-making industry to shut down and go. Yeah. We lost all the skills that those people had, all the industries that fed into it, and having been Australia's first defence industry minister, I worked very hard to build defence industry, much of it in South Australia, and I found that in my opinion, having a car-making industry added to our defensibility. And I was bitterly disappointed when Joe Hockey took that action.
Do you agree with the submarine purchase? $365 billion is a lot of money.
The purchase of?
The nuclear submarines.
Oh, the AUKUS agreement.
Absolutely. It's vital for us. And I was talking about getting 2 Virginia-class submarines long before Morrison announced AUKUS, because it seemed to me a logical way to go. I mean, our first 2 submarines in this country, I think we got them in 1911, the AE-1 and AE-2, which were British submarines with British crew with Australians added. Now, of course, we lost both of those. One went through the Dardanelles just before the landing at Anzac, and I was responsible for having the Navy provide some money that we actually found that submarine, and it's now in Turkey. You can see it. It's been resurrected. Nobody died on it because everybody got off. Yeah. But, of course, the AE-1 we lost off Papua New Guinea, and that has subsequently been found and remains a war grave in that sense. Mm-hmm. But there's a precedent. Our first 2 submarines, on which our Navy was built, came that way.
Where did the Oberons come from?
We bought those. I think we bought those from the Brits, the O-class. But you've got to understand, the O-boats were boats that did a really sharp dive was the way they operated, and they were pretty small. We could never have put women crew into an O-class boat, but I was the minister who put submariners into the Collins class because they're such a big boat that there's no reason why you can't have men and women on board and have it work perfectly well.
Yes. And did it?
Yes, worked well. We couldn't put any of those boats to work without women submariners.
Good.
It's been very successful. We learned the lesson that when you have a gender mixed crew, 30% is a minimum of the crew to be female for it to work. That way, it integrates well and everybody works well together. And I've been to sea quite often on warships. I'm not keen to go cruising, but I love going to sea in a warship. And I've been to some very interesting parts of the world in warships, including Gallipoli.
I'm not sure whether you've written a book or not, but you damn well should, if you haven't.
Well, perhaps I will.
So you haven't written a book yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh, golly, I think it would be fascinating.
The memoirs would be sensational to read.
Yes, absolutely.
The stories you could tell in the back corridors of Parliament House.
Indeed.
The mind boggles.
Well, I've been in some interesting places when things happened before I went into the Parliament. I went in 1975 to China with the Art Gallery Society of New South Wales, of which I was on the council. And we were the first really to go in as, and you can't use the word tourist because the Cultural Revolution was still in full play. Yeah. And we went in to look at the treasures of China, many of which were in bank vaults, just shoved in and not particularly looked after very well. But in the course of this trip, we were in Beijing, and Lady Mary Fairfax, who was also a good friend of mine, we were sharing a room, and noticed that that President Marcos was visiting China. There were banners up all over the city. He was very important at that time because he was head of the non-aligned movement, so he was being courted by China. And Mary had met and knew the Marcoses and sent a note saying that we were there. And she mentioned four of us, myself, Leslie Walford and Daniel Thomas. And what came back was an invitation to a dinner at the Great Hall of the People.
Wow.
So we told our Carter, or Mary told our Carter, and our Carter said he would have to discuss it. We had no idea whether we'd be allowed to attend or not. Fortunately, both Mary and I had packed something that was suitable for formal because it was formal. Yeah. And we're all dressed, standing there waiting, the four of us. And at 6:45, our Carter came and said, yes, we could go. So we all piled into his tiny little car, and up we went to the Great Hall of the People, where there was a great red carpet up the marble stairs, and there were great Mercedes with curtains at the windows being drawn up, and men in white jackets directing traffic, and all these beautiful people going up the stairs, and we hop of our tiny little car with our Carter, and up we go, and we're given a very royal, or regal, or rather nice position to be seated at. But the important thing about this dinner was that it was hosted by Marcos in honour of Chou En-lai. Mm-hmm. And he got up and spoke and said diplomatic relations had been established between China and the Philippines. Mm-hmm. And that was a bombshell. And then the person who spoke for China was not Chou En-lai, because he was dying. It was Deng Xiaoping. Uh-huh. And so Deng Xiaoping stood and reiterated that diplomatic relations were established. And this was really, really a really terrific announcement for them. And that was the night that I met Deng Xiaoping. So every time I went back to China after that, prior to Z, and I said I met Deng Xiaoping, my stocks rose enormously.
Yeah. All the contacts that you've made in your life would be just amazing. You could have opened a diplomatic public relations company, the like of which the world has never seen. Look, it's wonderful to talk to you, Bronwyn. It really is. I miss the conversations that we had so regularly.
Well, it was lovely for me to be able to mention Mary, because Mary formed Opera Foundation.
Yes.
Which is now for young Australians. Of course, you were on the early board, weren't you?
Yes, I had her on a program. She came on my program at Channel 10. It was a program called The Better Half. And it was designed because she was married to Sir Warwick, and Sir Warwick Fairfax was the head of the enormous, very successful Fairfax Publishing Company. And the idea of the program was you talk to the woman behind the man, the power behind the throne. And she very kindly said she'd come on the program. And then I was just seeing her out. She had her Rolls Royce at the front door to pick her up. And she said, look, I'm putting this thing together called the Opera Foundation. Would you come and serve on the board? And I said, oh, Lady Fairfax, I would love to, but I know nothing about opera. And she said, we'll teach you. It'll be all right. You'll get the hang of it. And I remember her very, very kindly. I thought she was a beautiful, generous lady.
She was. And she was another woman who was driven to do good things for people, to open up opportunities. And she invited me to come on the board several years ago, and now I'm the chairman. And we do really exciting things. We open the doors for young Australians to be able to sing with companies like Deutsche Oper in Berlin, the Vienna State Opera, and to join La Scala and Opera Holland Park. So we do things that they just would never get the opportunity to do.
Wonderful to talk to you. Look after yourself, Bronwyn, and thank you again.
Great pleasure. Lovely talking to you and to Ian.
We'll see you at lunch sometime with Tracy.
I look forward
Tracy.
to that.
Yes, okay then.
Bronwyn Bishop, ladies and gentlemen.